Professor Gibson, and this is a introduction to Math 154, Unit 1. Okay? The first unit is broken down into 5 sections that are covered over the course of 3 weeks. Week 1 will cover sections 1.1% and 1.2% change. Week 2 will cover the third section, ratios and proportions. And then week 3 will cover dimensional analysis, and scientific notation. All right, so let's jump into a little bit of explanation. As you work through these topics, by the way, there is a bit of a theme running through them, all except that last week's scientific notation involved working with fractions. The basic equation, if you will, in every situation has one or more fractions in it. All right, so let's start with percents. I've written up here on the left x percent of 1, right? X percent of y is z. So that is for the basic equation in words. If you wanted to see it with numbers, you would write it something like this: 15% times 80 equals 12. So so 15% of 80 is written as 15% times 80, and the is an equal sign. Okay, so writing it as an equation in a general format with all variables, then the percent really means, right? Percent is per cent, that means per 100. So x percent is, that's where our fraction is. That's x over 100. All right, so if it was 15%, you could write it as 15 over 100, or if you wanted to, you could write it as a decimal. Write it times y, so that's x percent of y. Is equals, and then z, like that. Now, the reason I write this with 3 variables in it is you never know from one question to the next which one they're going to ask you for. They'll always give you 2 of the 3 and then ask you for the third. All right? So now let's look at a couple examples. I picked these because they're a kind that I'm used to getting a good number of questions about. So after a 15% increase, the new cost is $97, and so 15% increase, new cost is $97.50. What was the original, right? They're asking us for the original. Okay, so in the equation, the original is kind of y. There's an original on this kind of question. There's an original amount. It's multiplied by a percent, right? And you get the new amount then is the z. So next, so after a 15% increase. So the trick to this is to realize, remember, if you have all of something, right, you have 100%. So if you have a 15% increase, you've got all of it plus 15%. So 15% increase means that you're going to have 115%. And then writing this as a fraction is 115 over 100. Right? So 15% increase, 115% of our original amount, which in this case is what they're asking us for, ends up being $97.50. Okay? Now we just need to solve for the y. All right. Well, to solve for the y, we've got to divide both sides by the 115 over 100, right? So you remember, dividing by a fraction is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal. All right, like that. Now we just got to multiply the right side out over here. Probably some calculator time, right? This turns out to be 84.78. Actually, this was dollars to start, so it's dollars. All right, let's try another one. So after a 20% price decrease, the new cost is $64. What was the original cost? Now you notice in both of these, I have done the questions where they ask for the original cost. Again, that's because in my experience, these are the ones that trick people up a little bit more often. The catch here is to realize that the original cost, if you're using the equation like I'm using it, the original cost is the y, and the new cost is the z. All right, now let's go talk about a 20% price decrease. All right, so if all of something is 100%, and you drop down by 20%, right, got a 20% decrease, 100 minus 20 is 80. So when you want to do a 20% decrease, you multiply by 80 over 100, or again, if you wanted to, you could write that as a decimal. There's our original amount, which is unknown. And the new amount is $64. Okay, now we have to solve this, right? Same way as before. Y equals 64. We've got to divide by the 80 over 100. So that's the same thing as multiplying the reciprocal. And you break out your calculator, you work this one out, you will find this is $80. Okay? All right, so last one in 1.1. Now this one has got a slight twist in it. Let's have a look. An item that initially cost $75 is marked down, so it starts at 75, marked down by 25, later reduced by an additional 10. What is the latest cost? Okay, so remember the way we do things, the original amount is going to be 75, that's going to be the Y. The catch to this one is we got two percentages, so I'm going to do them both, right? We've got to drop down by 25, and then we've got to decrease by another 10, all right? Now remember, so to decrease by 25%, 100 minus 25, I'm going to multiply by 75 over 100, all right? Then I have to decrease by another 10. Well, 100 minus 10 is 90, so multiply by 90 over 100. All right, so there's my X percent, if you will. There's two of them. This time they give us the original amount, so we can put the 75 in here. And we ask for the new amount, that's always the Z. Okay, so we just need to multiply all this out. What you get when you do this is you get Z equals 50.625. Okay, so let's say for this one it said to give it to the nearest 100th or maybe to two decimal places. Be very careful about that. Pay close attention to the questions because they will tend to tell you, I want this many decimal places or the nearest whatever, and you got to do it. All right? Okay, let's look at this. The second section here in week 1 is percent change. Now, these questions, some of them will just ask you for percent change. When they do, they usually say either percent increase or percent decrease. But a good number of them actually will also ask you for either an absolute change, or sometimes they call it the amount of change. All right, and so let's talk about that a little bit. Actually, so the percent change formula I've written for you here. All right, percent change. This is a fraction again. The numerator is the new cost minus the original cost. Divide that whole thing by the original cost, and then multiply the whole fraction times 100 to convert it from a decimal to a percent. All right, so let's look at this one. Professor Palm bought a new car last year for $42,000. A year later, the car is worth $33,000. Unfortunately, this is pretty much the way things really work. So the first question is, what is the absolute decrease in the value of Professor Palm's car? Okay, now the absolute change, sometimes just called the amount of change, is simply the new cost or the new amount minus the old. Okay, so in this case, that is 33,000 minus 42,000. Which gives us minus 9,000. All right, now here's another place you've got to pay attention to the wording a little bit. Because this one asked us for the decrease, the word decrease already kind of includes the minus sign. So our answer on this one would be there was a $9,000 decrease. Okay, if they had asked us for the change, the word change does not include the minus sign. We would have had to give them the minus 9,000. Okay, let's look at the next one. What is the percent decrease in the value of the car? All right, so remember, this is percent decrease is percent change. So this is going to equal the new amount minus the original amount. That whole thing divided by the original. And then take this whole fraction and multiply it by 100 to turn it into percent. Okay, so in this case, that's going to get us back to our 33,000. You'll notice that it save you a little bit of work here. When they ask you for the absolute change first, you really, the absolute change is just what goes in the numerator for the percent change. All right. Over 42,000 times 100. Now, again, you break out the calculator, whatever, you work this out. You're going to get an answer to the nearest tenth of minus 21.4%. Okay. Now, again, because this has the word decrease, we're not going to put the minus sign in our final answer. All right. So our final answer for this one is going to be a 21.4% decrease. All right. So generally speaking, what's going to happen is when it's going to be a drop, if they say decrease, you just don't count the minus sign. If it is an increase question, it'd still be positive. You don't really even have to worry about this business with the minus sign. All right, that's the end here for our intro for week 1 of Unit 1. Hope you enjoy the class, and I will see you again next week.